I said the most important things before I pressed record, so we're good. Ignatius's discernment of spirits, and then we're going to work towards Teresa of Avila's interior castle, the foundation of the spiritual life. Discernment of spirits has to do with realizing what's going on in your soul, all the way from I feel sad today, or I have a spirit of contentment, a spirit of prayer, to discerning, temptations from the devil. What we're going to focus on is what most normal people experience in their life before they have visions or, attacks from the devil. So it's the early part of discernment of spirits and the early part of the interior castle. All of us have daily decisions to make that affect us and people around us. Do I speak up? Do I speak out? Do I offer it up? Do I move? Or should I stay? Should I stick with this job? Or should I leave this job? Should I start this project? Or quit this project? Stop this activity? Make this rule? Discipline my kid? Or not this time? Change the rule in the family? Just lots and lots of decisions. And why do we care? There's a lot of reasons to care. Partly because I think discernment has a bad rap right now. It sounds like so many people, especially in my generation, being like, I don't know, what should I do? And they're just worried all the time. But Christ came to give us life to the full. Plato has a wonderful quote, the unexamined life is not worth living. It really is good to know why you're doing what you're doing and to think about things. Also, discernment of spirits, it sounds like you're going to be very introspective and analyzing yourself all the time, and that doesn't sound good for you or healthy, but actually discernment of spirits really removes scruples. It removes guilt, it removes worry, and so it's just a really wonderful thing that Ignatius developed for people. So, what does it mean? Before we do Ignatius's discernment of spirits, he has some ground rules, and people who have written about this have explained ground rules. At the end of the talk, if you want any of the quotes that I refer to or any of the books that I refer to, I have a whole outline. I can email you or print out copies for next week, whichever you like. And you can just write your name on that little clipboard over there, or if you have a piece of paper, you can just say, I want you to email me this. This is my email. Or I want you to make a copy. Bring it next week. And I will do that. One of the books is one that I refer to a lot is Michael Gately's, the book that Father referred to last week, Michael Gately's Consoling the Heart of Jesus. And there's several others on Ignatius. Ground rules are that Christ founded the church and works through her, so you never have to discern, should I be breaking one of her rules or should I be doing something immoral? We have human nature, which means we have bodies and they need to be taken care of. They're all we have to serve God with. It's hard to serve Him if we're making a hash of the body. Teresa of Avila will talk about it takes prudence. You have to find the line between pampering the body and driving it too harshly. Our souls were made for God. It's part of just our human nature. So if you are in a habit of sin, it's quite likely that you will be experiencing sadness or guilt or worry. And we're called to prayer. And so decisions which crowd prayer out are not going to be good decisions. And the final sort of ground rule is God's will is primary. No matter how good something is, it's not good for you if it's not God's will for you. Just because something is needed or good doesn't mean that you're the one who's supposed to do it. There's a great book by Dom Chattard. It used to be called The Soul of the Apostolate. It's been reprinted by Sophia Press, called Inner Strength for Active Apostles. He says anybody who's doing work for the church, and that involves most of us, or work for our families, or just any kind of work, needs to keep certain things in mind. Here's his little list of things to keep in mind. He says, if you're the kind of man who's going to skip prayer or not develop your life of prayer because you're so involved in work or good projects and volunteering and commitments, you're exactly the kind of man that Satan will send fresh projects. I have found that I never get as many good ideas. We should do this play. We should start this, as when I'm going into the adoration. All of a sudden I'm like, oh, I have all these great ideas. After a while I realized, wait, why am I getting all these ideas right now? And I found that the only way that I could survive is to take a little notebook in and write, this is a really great idea for later, do that later. And to turn my phone off, because otherwise everyone who's ever loved you or needed you will be like, I need you right now. And so you just have to carve out that time. This list from Dom Chattard I found really comforting because there are so many needed projects and works of mercy, and it seems like, well, if I don't do it, who's going to do it, you know? But he says, never undertake what is beyond one's strength. Only as much as the work pleases him. In all labors, however absorbing, always keep peaceful and self-possessed. It's a great list. I'm not going to do all of it, but it's a great list to think about. 10 points for anybody who's especially busy. This 9th one, leave success solely to God and keep from all anxiety. Reminded me of a letter from Teresa of Avila that I'd read. She, when she did her reform, such a difficult time. There's a Protestant Reformation going on. She's starting all these new Carmels, and the old Carmels are very angry. They're saying, what are you saying about us? Are you saying we're not very good? Or what are you saying? Teresa of Avila, I'm not saying anything. We just want to live this way. We want to live the rule this way. So she got lots of criticism, besides just the administrative work of traveling around and around. She's a Carmelite nun. She's supposed to be, all day in prayer, but her life was, going from town to town to town and meetings all the time. And one of the women who was running one of the Carmels was very impatient and very zealous. If you're like Teresa of Avila and you're great-hearted and you have great ideas and you are ready to do something noble for God, you will find that you will attract a lot of people who by personality are really zealous. And they're like, let's do this. And they're really hard on anyone who's not quite ready for that. So, Madre Maria Bautista was a very tough woman and easily angered at people. And so she was always getting into fights with the women at her convent. And Teresa of Avila would have to solve them. This is something Teresa wrote to her. In some houses there would be no nuns if such attention were paid to details. At the beginning of a foundation and for other business matters, adaptations of some sort have to be made. That you think you know everything is disheartening, and you say that you are humble, and all you care about is your own little house, and you do not consider what is essential for all of them. she keeps going, I find it displeasing that you think there is no one capable of seeing things as you do. I was really moved by that because I think, I get that temptation. Nobody understands what I see. And I think, here's Teresa of Avila saying, you are just probably working too hard. That's not the kind of work God's calling us to do. It's your project now. It's not God's project. Teresa of Avila keeps going. This is a great line. I think about this a lot. It is good to consider things carefully, but not with so much drive. For no one will make me believe that this arises from humility. So those are the ground rules. Real briefly, we have bodies that we need to take care of. We have souls that need to avoid sin and must devote time to prayer and always keep God's will primary. And Christ founded the church. So given that, Ignatius says, all right, so if you have decisions to make or if things are going on in your life, this is how you sort of sort out what's going on. He says basic ideas, there are highs and lows in the soul. And if you know what's going on in your soul, it really helps with your prayer, with your virtue, and with making decisions. There's two basic steps to doing discernment of spirits. It's examining your conscience and then asking, am I in a period of consolation, happiness, or desolation? Knowing the state of your conscience really helps with evaluating consolation and desolation. So he says, You want to examine your conscience, and you want to look back over the year. It's basically, if you're good, getting better, note that. This is not a big hour-long thing Ignatius is saying. You just like look at your life. Okay, 6 months ago, or last year, or a month ago, what was going on? And you can just basically say like, all right, I was going to confession regularly, and I had solved this problem with my mother, and now I'm not going to confession, and I just had this huge fight with my neighbor. Okay, so that's not good getting better. That's sort of good getting a little bit worse. You dipped. It can be the opposite. 6 months ago, I have no idea if I was praying. And now I try to do prayers at meals and to say the rosary once a week. Well, that's good. You were good, now you're getting better. So Ignatius says, first just kind of take stock of basic tangible things. Prayers, your relationship with your family, your friends, and just sort of make a quick call like, where am I at? If you're like, I don't know, how do I know if I'm better? We don't really, but Ignatius gives us a couple more things. If you're good, getting better, if you've had improvement, you'll react to sad things with some kind of peace and reasons to keep going. If something makes you happy, it's something that ought to make you happy, and you'll feel fond and happy memories of that thing. So you're kind of in a good spot. Just write that down or take note of that. If you're bad getting worse, you'll have those tangible things like, okay, I'm praying less, or okay, I'm fighting more, or whatever. There's a couple things Ignatius also points out. If sad things happen to you, then you'll end your prayer with despair and chill. You're gonna end your prayer times just feeling even kind of worse. If things make you happy, they won't actually be good for you, and you'll often feel happy in the moment, but then afterwards you're going to feel let down, distracted, and easily bored. I think that's a great thing to think about. You're at a party, and the parties are fine, but then after the party, you think, I'm just kind of bummed out. That's a good thing to note. You're like, okay, what's going on in my life? It's a good time to turn to an examination of conscience and think like, so where'd that come from? And maybe it's as simple as, well, you're fighting more, or you're praying less. So that's sort of like, Ignatius says, all right, just do that little review of your life, and then think about, how do I feel right now, happy or sad? And he talks about false consolation versus real consolation, false desolation versus real desolation. If you have been slipping, what makes you happy is not actually real happiness. You're going to get false consolations. For people getting worse, the evil spirit is gentle, light, sweet. You want to be really careful about committing to something or deciding to do something if that's the case. Because what seems really great right now might not be so great for you. Ignatius says, the first rule, people who are in mortal sin, their pleasures are usually from the evil spirit. False desolation. If you're getting worse, a good inspiration, a good idea, something that's from God is actually going to be really disturbing to you and irritating because you're not really trained for them. I remember when I was a kid, my mom would be like, hey, you want to come to Mass with me? And I'd be like, ugh, gross, no. And if my mom wanted me to go to some Opus Dei meetings, which I love now, but then I was like, why do we have to drag God into everything? I was just really repulsed by anybody who would bring up religion or God. I like God, but I just don't want to talk about him. Now I look back and I think, who likes things that they don't want to think about? And I remember something I'm always so kind of embarrassed about, but I'll tell you the story anyway. My grandmother wanted to take me to Mass. When I would go visit her for the day, she would like make me lunch, and give me ice cream, and watch movies, and eat Cheetos, and just all this great stuff. And then in the middle of it, the day would be ruined because she wanted to go to Mass, you know. So I remember I thought, I just don't want to go to Mass. So we were walking out of the apartment, and I seriously decided to fake that I had twisted my ankle. And we walked down the stairs, and I did the whole thing, and she has always been a little over-scrupulous. And how did I know that I could manipulate her that? I don't know, it's terrible. But I did this whole thing, and I'm like, oh, I don't know. And she just freaked out. She's like, can you walk on it? And I'm like, I don't know. And so then we went to the apartment, back to her apartment. We didn't go to Mass. She got me ice cream, and I just think, what a brat. What a brat, you know? And I'm like, well, right. You're depressed by the thought of Mass, but that's not real desolation. That's false desolation. You don't want to pay any attention to that sadness. If you're sad, that's because you have a problem. Ignatius also talks about real consolation. If you have been growing slightly, working out your problems with your neighbor, forgiving, trying to pray more, trying to work on virtues, when you feel peace and comfort, that is the good spirit. Saint Bernard of Clairvaux says, you know God's visited you if you experience grace and truth. He says, I need both of these. I need truth that I may not be able to hide from him, and grace that I may not wish to hide. And what he's talking about there is that you get the truth of your condition. It's like you see who you are and what you need and what's wrong with you. But at the same time, you feel like, but I can work on this, and God will help me, and God loves me. It's like guilt without the guilt. It's kind of beautiful. If you are progressing, God will show you your faults at the same time that He's forgiving you and helping you to get better. A desolation for the person who is getting better is going to feel like just pure guilt. It will be like, you're bad and you'll never get better, so why are you even trying? It's depressing, it's sharp, it's disturbing. It makes you have scruples, it makes you resentful, it makes you give up trying to find some practical way to get better. That's a real desolation, and that's a real temptation. Reasons to quit, that's desolation, says Ignatius. What do you do? What do you do if you're in any one of these sort of states of life? Father Michael Gately's Consoling the Heart of Jesus sort of took Ignatius's ideas and put them into a wonderful category. If you're in consolation, real consolation, he says you're going to eat it up. You want to store it up for later. And you want to plan for when that time passes. We go back and forth. And you want to treasure those memories. You want to humble yourself, because really any sort of peace that you have or any revelation about your soul is a grace from God. It's not you suddenly getting all this wisdom. And you want to listen, because often God does recommend things to you or inspire you to do things during a period of consolation. There's a lot of things Ignatius calls consolation. It can be, everything from tears and cheerfulness and joy to just comfort or calmness or generosity in difficulties or strength or just being satisfied with your life. So there's a lot of different varieties, but it's basically a kind of happiness. Very excited happiness or just peaceful happiness. Of course, there's all the ground rules. You never want to forget those. So if you feel like peaceful and inspired to do something, you want to go back and examine your conscience just to make sure that this is like real peace and not you've actually been slipping and you're getting some bad idea. You're always examining your conscience. If you're in desolation, the first thing to do, says Father Gately, on Ignatius, is when did it start? You want to examine your conscience, and if it's coming from a sin, you just want to repent and fix that. Another thing I think he might agree is to examine your prayer. Ignatius says to examine prayer is part of prayer. At the very beginning, you want to think about what was my first thought, and at the end, what are my thoughts now, and what's going on in the middle. If your thoughts end in something bad or distracting or weakening or disturbing and they take away your peace and your tranquility, those are bad. I found it really helpful to track my prayer, because when I don't know if this happens to you, but I go into my holy hour or adoration at the chapel or whatever, and I walk out, I'm just so resentful. I'm just so mad and depressed. Or I walk, this is kind of embarrassing, but I walk out with like all these impure thoughts, and I think, wait, what happened? And I think this is, Ignatius talks about this, is the evil spirit masquerades as good thoughts. And he takes good ideas and he twists them. And if you're not really aware, then he will just eat up your prayer. So, I start thinking of some relative and I'm like, yeah, I really need to pray for her. And instead of just like saying a Hail Mary and moving on, I start thinking about how we're getting along. And then I think about what happened in that last conversation. And then what happened last year and we've never gotten over, and how she always does this. And then I walk out and I'm just like mad. And maybe I've even, repeated to other people and I gossip. And so in one way, I've fallen into sin. So that's a win for the power of evil. Even if I fight it though, I know now the more attention I take, I know that I'll waste like 20 minutes. It's the only time I have for prayer. And I waste 20 minutes stewing over this problem with this person. So even if I don't actually sin, my time is stolen away from me because I'm not really aware of what's happening with my prayer. It started out as like some pious thought, a good thought to pray for this person, but then it just gets twisted because I'm not very alert. Ignatius says you want to stay alert. You want to be praying and then guarding your prayer. And the impure thought kind of thing, it starts off like, he's so virtuous, he's such a great leader, and then it just gets completely twisted, and you think, now my day is just ruined. How did that happen? And again, even if you fight the thoughts and you don't have to confess them or whatever, the prayer is wasted. It's just taken from you. And when are you going to have time to go back and pray until the next day? I've gone probably months with at least a third of my prayer taken away because I have not been alert. That's just a waste. That's sad. Ignatius says, just watch it. Just watch the prayer. If you're feeling desolation, you also want to deal with the physical causes. It could be as simple as, are you sleeping? Are you eating right? Are you getting vitamins? Have you gone outside? Some of the best spiritual direction I've ever gotten was just things like that. I'd be like, my life is over. And they're like, how much sleep are you getting? You're like, not very much. Okay, why didn't you work on that for a while before you think about if you're battling the devil? So oh, right, okay. And then sometimes you just don't know why you're sad. You just can't figure it out. And you just pray with the psalm, from my hidden fault, save me, O Lord. A priest once told me, God loves us and he wants us to know his will. And so you just, you acknowledge it and you just pray. Teresa says, sometimes we just are sent these periods of sadness so that we don't become like Lucifer and just think, oh, I'm just so great and happy and awesome all the time, so that we realize our need. Father Gailey also says you want to fight. You want to remember your old periods of consolation, all the great things you've ever had in your life, the people, the Christmases. Treasure those things, and you want to just make acts of trust. Sometimes just pray the creed, whatever. Trust in God that he is going to save you. Francis de Sales says anxiety is the worst evil. Don't let it paralyze you. And don't listen. This is the best advice, I would almost say. When you're in a period of desolation, you will be tempted to change your plans from small ones to your vocation and make new bad decisions. Always submit to your confessor or spiritual director, or if you have a trusted friend, tell them, I'm going through this, and get somebody else to shed light on it. Sometimes if I'm the only one who knows about this, I'm just like, I just don't know what to do. You just go around and around. It's so much better to talk to somebody. You want to be very careful not to change your decisions if the thing you are terrified of doing, hate to do when you're in desolation, equals the thing you were excited to do when you were at peace in consolation, that's a pretty good sign that you should keep doing that thing. If there's really no reason to hate this thing you committed to, then you really need to stick with it. That's a good sign. It is good to up your prayer or examination of conscience or frequent the sacraments more if you're in this period. I started doing this with impure thoughts. I thought, I can't get rid of them. It's so irritating. Well, I guess it will be a win-win if I invoke the Sacred Heart every time that I get one, because at least God will be honored, and the devil will probably be like, oh, it's so annoying. And then maybe they'll go away. And so you want to fight and you want to stick with your plans. It's a kind of an interesting thing. Like if you're in a period of peace, you can get, somebody can say, hey, do you want to join this project? Or, hey, do you want to quit that? Or you want to take this new job or whatever? And you'd be like, oh, no, thank you. I'm very content where I am. And then if you're in a period of desolation and somebody says the same kind of thing, you think, oh no, maybe this is a sign. Maybe I should change. And one time, I was in a period of desolation and somebody offered me a job and I was like, oh no, I'm going to have to discern this and it's going to take so long and then I remembered this whole discernment of spirits thing. I thought, I don't have to waste any time on that. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing, and when I get happy again, then I'll think about that. I was like, actually kind of consoling just to shelve that whole decision, because don't discern and make new decisions in a period of desolation. Desolation can be as much as just taking away your power to think. You're just irrational. You're just going around in circles. And the last thing Father Gately takes from St. Ignatius is don't change your decisions, and that includes don't run to some higher good or be zealous. If these are the things you committed to, this good work, this rosary, just keep doing that. It's often a kind of a backwards temptation to try to take on some new project or go somewhere where you'll be holier. You can be closer to God, because that's actually a temptation. I've been reading a lot about the Benedictines, and they saw it as a particular temptation. They take a vow of stability just to stay where they are. And they have some beautiful quotes that they treasured from the Desert Fathers and that other newer Benedictines have written about them. One of the temptations was horror loci, horror of the place. The demon sends him hatred against the place, against life itself, and against the work of his hands, and makes him think he's lost the love among his brethren, that there's none to comfort him. He stirs the monk also to long for different places in which he can find easily what is necessary for his life, and can carry on a much less toilsome and more expedient profession. There's a lot of beautiful things they've written about this. They see this is a temptation. You'll feel like if I could just go somewhere else, then I could be holy, then I would find peace. And the monk has got to stick with his vocation. They used to say, sit in your cell and you will be saved. Or, I keep within these walls for the sake of Christ. One wonderful Benedictine, it's a long quote, but he ends it talking about how, there are problems wherever you go and with whatever you're doing. The fathers used to say, if a temptation arises where you're living in the desert, don't leave in the hour of temptation. If you go at that moment, you'll encounter the same temptation awaiting you wherever you go. Very moving. And there's a great line in Psalm 16, the Lord is the portion of mine inheritance and of my cup. Thou maintainest my lot. The lines are fallen unto me in pleasant places. I have a goodly heritage. It's a good prayer to pray if you're worried and you think you should do something different, or you should, you just are so discontented with what you have right now. That's a desolation. Just hang on. I love this line. This line from Psalm 16 made its way into The Wind and the Willows. And, there's a great chapter right before the chapter Dulce Domum, Sweet Home, where Mole is like, I want new adventures. And he goes off and they almost die. And then Badger saves them. And at the end of the chapter, Mole learns, like, he should embrace what he has. So he hurried along, eagerly anticipating the moment when he'd be at home again among the things he knew and liked. The Mole saw clearly that he was an animal of tilled field and hedgerow, linked to the plowed furrow, the frequented pasture, the lane of evening lingerings, the cultivated garden plot. For others, the asperities, the stubborn endurance, or the clash of actual conflict that went with nature in the rough. He must be wise, must keep to the pleasant places in which his lines were laid. There's Psalm 16, it's really nice. And which held adventure enough in their way to last a lifetime. Now, God may call you to adventure and everything like that, but that can only really be decided in consolation. Now, the whole thing with this Ignatian process is, what if you're in a period of desolation and consolation and you don't have time to wait to make a decision? Ignatius gives really practical advice. He says, well, if you're in desolation but you still need to make this decision, you just list the pros and cons, set a deadline, go to Mass every day or say Mass every day. Think what you would recommend to somebody else, and then make your decision. God will help you. I just thought, okay. You don't have to know for certain. You just do the things that you can do, and if you have to decide now, then just decide now, and God will help you. It's so great to think about how many decisions melt away if you use discernment of spirits. It really does take away, like, guilt and worry. You know, if you're in a period of deep guilt or sadness, then you don't need to do anything. You just keep doing what you're doing and you trust in God. And it's when you're full of strength and peace and contentment, that's a good time to think, well, what can I handle? What can I take on? You know, that's, I find that very consoling. Now, I'm going to turn,
when you're discerning the spirits and you have a decision and you need to make it, you know, there's a deadline with it, does it, for lack of a better way of saying this, work to your advantage to aim for peace? You know, it might be something that's really scary in your life, but if it's bringing you peace interiorly, is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I mean, he would say if you can't wait until you have peace. There's some deadline or whatever. It just has to be decided. What would I think of this if I was in peace? That's why it's good to recall old times of consolation. How did I think about things? What did I desire then? I'm very worried right now, but I know that when things are good, this is a good thing, and that if you have, you know that you have taken care of your body, and it's not against the church, and you've examined your conscience, and as far as you know, you're taking care of things. If it seems like a good thing, go for it. Yeah, you want to balance it with all the practical needs of the body and the church, and not over extenuating yourself, but then otherwise go for it, and treat random irrational fears as temptations, because that's what they are. So I'm going to turn to Teresa of Avila now. All these things that Ignatius talks about, of course, are predicated based on the idea that you have a deep life of interior prayer. I just talk about you're examining your prayer, you're examining your conscience, you're thinking, you're invoking God, you're making acts of trust. That's all sort of assuming that you actually do those things every day. And it's more important, like John Paul II says, it's not about what we're doing, but who we are. And Benedict XVI says, our first task is to receive the love of God. So Teresa of Avila and Ignatius were masters of prayer, and that's why they were able to do so many practical decisions and discern God's will. So what did their prayer life look like? I've pulled ideas from them, also Francis de Sales and Josemaria Escriva, because they were so concerned, especially with lay people. Teresa of Avila felt the influence of evil spirits, as it were. She says she talks about for like 20 years of her life, she did not pray. She says, this was the most terrible trick the devil could play on me. Under the guise of humility, that seeing myself so corrupted, I began to fear the practice of prayer. And she said at the same time, she really wanted to help other people learn to pray. She says that's a very common temptation for beginners. You tell everybody else what to do, and you're not doing it. But yeah, it sounds familiar. So, and then she says, she describes something that maybe we all go through. If we turn from self towards God, our understanding and our will become nobler and readier to embrace all that is good. If we never rise above the slough of our own miseries, we do ourselves great disservice. Buried in the wretchedness of our earthly nature, these streams of ours will never disengage themselves from the slough of cowardice, pusillanimity, small-souledness, and fear. And she starts saying, like, okay, what does that look like? We shall always be glancing around and saying, are people looking at me or not? If I take a certain path, shall I come to harm? Dare I begin such and such a task? Is it pride that's impelling me to do so? Can anyone as wretched as I engage in so lofty an exercise of prayer? Will people think better of me if I refrain from following the crowd? Extremes are not good, they say, even in virtue, and I'm such a sinner that if I were to fail, I should only have farther to fall. Perhaps I shall make no progress, and in that case, I shall only be doing good people harm. I love this because she made it like a dialogue, and you can just see these thoughts swirling around, just like worry, like what are other people, and then if I do that, then that will happen, and then, oh, it'll just be worse. And Teresa of Avila would say, you can't think about all that. It's always good to turn to God. You can't count the great things that will happen to you through prayer. And she talks about the 7 mansions of prayer. These have been, this is from CatholicCulture.org, which on EWTN's, or connected to EWTN. They sort of split it up for her. So if you look here, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, those are things that God controls and He puts into your soul. They're very beautiful. Father Dubé writes about them. We can't control them. They're just pure gift. And it's all, these stages of the Lord taking over your soul. It's very beautiful, all the way to the mystical marriage. And Teresa talks about these remarkable experiences that she had, but these are not the point of the spiritual life. She would say in the Interior Castle, perfection consists not in consolations, but in the increase of love. On this too will depend our reward, as well as on the righteousness and truth which are in our actions. And she's also had a kind of sense of humor about it. There were people around her that were saying, I'm having visions too, or I think I'm in the 7th mansion. And in one of her letters, Teresa suggested that 2 nuns who were having many of these spiritual experiences, she said, they would not have had so many experiences if they had been with me. So I'm going to go back to the part of the mansions, the 1st and 2nd, that we have control over. And Teresa's really great. You never shed any of these stages. She would say that the 1st and 2nd mansion are really just like an ongoing cycle of vocal prayer and meditating on a spiritual truth, applying it to yourself, and then resolving to act on it. Effective or like affectionate mental prayer. You turn to God and you just speak to Him from your heart. And the prayer of simple regard. Mother Teresa, I think, talked a lot about this. You just look at Jesus. You can't do that very long because your thoughts start wandering. But you can try to do that, and it's good to sort of go in and out of them. Francis de Sales and Josemaria Escriva kind of talk about these stages in a different. Oh, I just want you to see my beautiful chart. Okay, we're almost there. Talk about trying to fill your life with a cycle of these things. And of course, Mass is at the top. It is the most important. But I think that all of the saints would say, but it's really important to have a period of mental prayer every day, because that's where you think about, could I go to Mass more? When I go to Mass, do I pay attention? Could I do that better? How's my prayer going? What about virtues and how I relate to my neighbor and service? What about other beautiful prayers of the church, like the Liturgy of the Hours? Flannery O'Connor, she committed to that. She did that every day. Francis de Sales recommended that every year in his book, Introduction to the Devout Life, you make a yearly examination. He has great questions that take you through like every aspect of your life, just to think about like, how was it last year? How am I now? What can I work on? And then Opus Dei and Jose Maria Escrivá talk about all these different small things you can put into your day, the morning offering and night prayers, doing small, little, beautiful penances and offering them up for people, getting up right away when the alarm goes off. I've seen another one like, having less internet entertainment, turning off that YouTube video. Things that are not like, flagellating yourselves, but things that just curb your will and are really beautiful small sacrifices that are not going to make you some twisted, weird person, but they will bring grace to people. My sister asked me one year, like, I need a good penance for Lent. What should I do for Lent? And I was inspired. I said, you should... she was in college. She's very fashionable. You should pick out an outfit in the morning, and that's the outfit that you wear, and you don't change, even if you don't like it. And she goes, oh no, one outfit. And I thought, that's great, because no one will ever know that. That's not big, but it's for her, it was big. I love the practice of aspirations. Throughout the day, you try to attach to different things a reminder to pray. Like if you see an ambulance going by, you try to pray for the sick, the people that ambulance is going to. For people, like when the phone rings or when they walk through a doorway, they associate a particular image of a psalm or something with that. One of the best things I heard when I was 15, an Opus Dei Numerary recommended that I always have a picture of our Lord wherever I study, so I still have that picture with me. Keep it near where I work. That's just really great to sort of etch the day with remembrances of God. And now I think that's actually nice, even though when I was 8 I thought that was gross. But so I guess I got a little bit better. That's good. Simone Weil writes about prayer. She says, it's really good if we can be easily recollected, if we are not people of distraction. And so doing any of these things can help us be receptive to prayer and be the content of our prayer. Just lastly, this daily mental prayer, there's so many ways to do it that the saints have written about. Teresa of Avila, and there's a great book on this, Conversation with Christ by Father Peter T. Rohrbach, says it's basically you feel sorrow for your sins, you are thankful for what you have, you pray for what you need and those around you, and you praise God. And that is such an easy thing for a kid to remember. Like, what do I do when I'm praying? And all those things, you're talking to God. Francis de Sales has a more formal kind of meditation, but it's basically the same thing. You put yourself in the presence of God and you ask Him to help you, and then you look at a picture or you read the scriptures. Teresa said she never, for like 40 years, she never went to prayer without a book. She said, I couldn't look at pictures or just think thoughts. Dominicans can do that. I can't do that. And so she always had a book with her. And she would use that as her springboard. She'd read that. Francis de Sales says you consider it, and then you use it to think about your sins and to praise God and to thank Him and to pray for what you need. Ignatius would say, remember when you're examining your conscience, you're also looking at your prayer. It might be good to write some of these things down. Teresa stresses the gratitude. It's not feeling grateful, it's practicing it. You think of things and you make acts of gratitude for them. She has a wonderful quote. It's necessary to draw out strength again for service and to strive not to be ungrateful. How can people benefit and share their gifts lavishly if they do not understand that they are rich? I just love that. It's like, if you practice gratitude, then you will become a grateful person, and that's when you can actually do things for other people. You feel rich and you give out of your abundance. And Teresa says, whoever has not begun the practice of prayer, I beg for the love of God, for the love of the Lord, not to go without so great a good. If one perseveres, I trust then in the mercy of God, who never fails to pay anyone who has taken him for a friend. For mental prayer, in my opinion, is nothing else than an intimate sharing between friends. It means taking time frequently to be alone with him who we know loves us. I love advice I got when I was 15. They're like, just set a timer and do 5 minutes and do that every day. There's a great novel called The Little Prince, and there's a fox in there and a prince, and they're trying to make friends, and they say, all right, we'll meet tomorrow at this time. And then the prince is late, and the fox is like, if we're going to make friends, if you're going to tame me, I'm a wild animal, then you've got to stick to your commitment. Otherwise, what's going on? We're just always just going to, maybe it happens, maybe it doesn't, if we live purely spontaneously. So I think all of the saints would say it's better to just pick one of these things. There's so many ways to pray. Pick one and do that. I love that Flannery O'Connor said, I'm going to do the Liturgy of the Hours, and I'm going to do that. Because part of the whole thing is not being so great at all these kinds of prayers. Part of it's being faithful. It's like the Mother Teresa quote. God doesn't ask us to be successful. God asks us to be faithful. So pick something that you can do, and then, you can always build on that. But the main thing is to start that conversation with God and keep that going, however you need to make it go. Teresa does say that, and so does Dom Chattard, good occupations do crowd in. Stuff happens. People need you. And so, sometimes you can't pray. And I think, thank God, because most of us have, families. It's like, Dom Chattard's a Trappist monk, and Teresa of Avila is a Carmelite. So then they said, things will come up. I'm thinking, what things? But things do come up. They said, this is all you want to do, though, is you want to note, was I glad that I missed prayer, or was I sad? If you weren't sad, then you should try even harder to make sure that you get it in. If you were sad, then you're like, well, that's okay. Once in a while, your neighbor needs you. I went to go to Mass at St. Mary's today, and I had a lot of things to do, and I was getting ready for this talk, and they were on retreat, so there was no Mass, and I was like, oh, yes, now I can go shopping. Writing this talk has been hilarious, because yesterday I was writing this talk and I went to go make my holy hour at St. Elizabeth's, and I had to make it before I went to go teach confirmation. So all these pious practices, right? And I really hoped I would get the nearest parking spot because I was so late already, and I didn't, and I said a bad word. And then I started laughing, and I was like, because this is so random. All right, she's just like, that person took my parking spot, so I'm not going to be able to get to adoration. So I was just like, okay, well, all right, I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. I'm obviously in a period of consolation because I didn't feel that guilty. So, all right. Anyway, I'm about done. Francis de Sales would say it's a really good thing to wrap up your prayer with a spiritual bouquet. You look over, that period of time, and you think of one thought or two thoughts that you can take with you the rest of the day. It's really good. It will remind you of what you want to pray about tomorrow, and it will keep those resolutions, those things you thought about, those things to work on, or just your love for God, and keep it alive the rest of the day. That's a beautiful thing. The main thing, I'm just going to end with this, is a few quotes about the whole purpose of prayer. I love Mother Teresa talking about the first step toward holiness is the will to attain it. With a will that is whole, we love God, we opt for Him, we run toward Him, we reach Him, we possess Him. Often under the pretext of humility, of confidence, of abandonment, we forget about using our will. But it all depends on these words, I want or I do not want. I have to pour all my energy into the words I want. We cannot decide to become saints without a great effort of renunciation, of resisting temptations, of combat, of persecution, and all sorts of sacrifice. It's not possible to love God except at one's own expense. But at the heart of that quote of Mother Teresa is, it does have to begin with your desire. And I'm going to end with a quote from a teacher I had, a Dominican named Father Paul Murray, who stressed that, even when your life is a mess, you're at the bottom of desolation, or you have all these sins, all these problems, you'll always have control of your desire. And you can always start with that. You're always free with that. And I thought, oh, that's great, because you don't have to get anything lined up or solved before you can start desiring God and pursuing Him with prayer, or being open to Him with prayer. So here's the last two quotes. One is a quote from C.S. Lewis on desire, the longing for God, and then Father Paul Murray commenting on C.S. Lewis's quote. Right before I read this quote about this desire, I found recently that discernment of spirits and Teresa is just so helpful for so many things, because you read C.S. Lewis, Surprised by Joy, maybe many of you have read that, and you think, there's so many wonderful experiences at St. Boniface, and you think, yes, I do desire God, and sometimes that's sad, kind of sadness or kind of painful. So it was at Adoration on First Friday, and I felt like kind of empty, and I started crying, and I'm like, oh, here's my sadness, longing for God, it's so great. But then another part of me was like, you're starting to cry out of control. And oh no, when you wake up in the morning, you're going to be really tired, and you're going to have bad sleep, and your eyes are going to be all puffy, and you're not going to want to eat your breakfast. And I was like, and then I got really depressed and out of sorts. And I remembered this great discernment of spirits, and I was like, wait a second, what's going on? Because that's not God if you're starting to get all irritable and out of sorts and worried and nervous. And I was like, wait, why am I crying? Why am I crying? And so I realized that, we are parted from God in this veil of tears. And that is sad, and that can't be solved until we die. And that made me mad. And so I was like, well then, how about the world satisfies me until then? And the world doesn't satisfy me either. And that made me mad. And I saw Christ in the Garden of Eden. That's what, Garden of Gethsemane. That's an image I really like of Christ. And I saw Him there, and I didn't feel one bit sorry for Him. I was like, what about me? Come on. And I was like, oh. I think that started as longing for God, and I think it got very easily twisted into self-pity. And I was like, you know what? Go get a Kleenex, stop crying. You're going to have coffee in the morning. It's going to be delicious. Yes, I long for God. He's great. And then, because I didn't feel sorry for Him, I thought, well, you know what I can do? I can't control my feelings, but I can ask for the desire to pity His suffering and to be closer to Him. So I made a creed. And I was like, that is just so helpful. What do you do with all these emotions, and it's late night, we have work to do? The spiritual life can just be like so weird. Ignatius and Teresa, they give us such practical guidelines for sorting out our emotions and our tiredness and our desires, and saying, you have control of your desires, desire God, pray, make your life organized, and just keep going. Here's C.S. Lewis. And speaking of this desire for our own far-off country, which we find ourselves in ourselves even now, I feel a certain shyness. This is from The Weight of Glory. I am almost committing an indecency. I'm trying to rip open the inconsolable secret in each one of you, the secret which hurts so much that you take your revenge on it by calling it names like nostalgia and romanticism and adolescence. Our commonest expedient is to call it beauty and behave as if that settled the matter. Wordsworth's expedient was to identify it with certain moments in his own past, but all this is a cheat. If Wordsworth had gone back to those moments in the past, he would have found the thing itself, but only the reminder of it. What he remembered would turn out to be itself a remembering. the books or the music in which we thought the beauty was located will betray us if we trusted them. It was not in them, it only came through them. And what came through them was longing. These things, the beauty, the memory of our own past, are good images of what we really desire. But if they are mistaken for the thing itself, they turn into dumb idols, breaking the hearts of their worshippers. For they are not the thing itself. They are only the scent of a flower we have not found, the echo of a tune we have not heard, news from a country we have never yet visited. The sense that in this universe we are treated as strangers, the longing to be acknowledged, to meet with some response, to bridge some chasm that yawns between us and reality is part of our inconsolable secret. Our lifelong nostalgia, our longing to be reunited with something in the universe from which we now feel cut off, to be on the inside of some door which we have always seen from the outside, is no mere neurotic fancy, but the truest index of our real situation. My professor read that quote to us and then commented on it in the context of a class on Teresa of Avila. And this is what he said: all of us have this desire, but we're afraid of it. We say we're scared of so many things, but perhaps what most scares us is our capacity for greatness, because it means the cross and suffering and in reality being like God. Capax Dei, there is a wound in us. Catherine of Siena says we are the desire for God, and there is no remedy. This is our pain, but our dignity, our bliss. This is the most profound thing about the human person. Teresa of Avila's mission was to rip open the inconsolable secret. She had it as a child and before her conversion, because it is a desire common to us all. The hour of Augustine's "our hearts are restless until they rest in you" applies to all men. That is why preaching the gospel is not imposing something, but answering a need. Paul Scott writes, "Directly a man is born, he's thrown directly into his dream, as if into a sea. He would suffocate if he tried to climb out of his dream." We each of us have an inkling of our destiny from birth, and our life is an attempt to live it. It is hard to live in a dream because it is unfulfilled. To live with great desires is to live with a profound sense of unfulfillment, because these desires are unfulfillable until God. Most people die at 30. Our desires have been crushed by reality. Why continue hoping, trying, wanting, when we're so disillusioned and disappointed, when it is easier to accept the satisfaction of mediocre dreams? To really stay alive involves suffering, because we must live the gap between desire and fulfillment. Most of us don't have the courage. Part of us follow the banner of realism and common sense, but we should take care not to let this suffocate us. Teresa's autobiography is aflame with desire. She was never satisfied with the pedestrian, common sense view of life. She was irritated by cynicism, desiring protection from grandeur. She wrote in her commentary on Song of Songs, "Be certain that the Lord will never fail his lovers when they take a risk for him." Thank you.